My name is Melissa Balkin. I am currently from Grand Rapids, Michigan, but I actually lived in Indy last year, which is kind of how I got connected with this event. So I am a designer. I run a small design studio called Strong Design Studios. We specialize in helping small businesses, startups, and small creative agencies build meaningful and functional brands. So with that, I'm here to talk to you about branding today. Branding is super important to me because I think in this day and age, it's become so easy to start a business that there's becoming more and more clutter. And branding can really help you stand out in that clutter and provide extra value for your customers. So before I start talking to you about how to build your brand, let's first talk about what is a brand. And before we talk about what it is, let's talk about what it's not. So you've probably heard people say, a brand's not a logo. It's not a logo. It's also not your colors. It's not your name. It's not the name of your product. It's not your mascot. It's none of those things. Those things are simply your brand assets. They're pieces of your brand, but not the brand in entirety. So what is a brand? A brand is your audience's collective impression of you. It's what they think of you. It's the experience that they associate with your company, your product, your service. So it's not exactly tangible, right? So what is branding? If a brand isn't tangible, branding is the kind of making the brand tangible. It's the process of designing the experience associated with your organization so that you can kind of influence the impression people have of your organization. It allows you to design the experience, and it involves being represented accurately at every touch point. It's all about consistency. So a few examples of organizations with consistent brands. Apple, of course, is like the poster child for branding. Every time you interact with anything Apple, whether it's a product, a Genius, at the retail store, the website, you're going to have an extremely consistent experience. It's always going to be simple, sleek, very delightful, very innovative, because that's what Apple's built their brand to be. Starbucks is another great example. It doesn't matter what city you're in, where you are, I mean, even if you're in another country, Starbucks always feels the same. And it's because they've engineered that experience and their brand image to portray that warmth and friendliness. Target is another great example of this. Every experience with them is fun and fresh, super well designed. In preparing this presentation, I realized how big a value design itself is for Target. If you look at everything they do, it's well designed, and they put design on a pedestal. So why should you care about branding? Well, when your brand is well defined, it allows you to differentiate yourself in your market. And when you can differentiate yourself in your market, that means you can build your business strategically and not follow every whim of the market, every new trend. It allows you to remove yourself from the rat race of a commodity product and start competing on value. And when you can compete on value, you can charge a premium, which that's what everyone wants to do, right? So before we begin, I've got a couple items for you to consider here. So define your audience. Before you try to do any type of branding work on your company, you need to know who you're talking to. Now, this step is not part of the building of the brand because technically your brand exists outside of your audience. Your brand is intrinsic to you, not necessarily the audience. But your audience provides a lot of context. They can help give you insight as to what your brand is standing for, and that may be a good thing or a bad thing. You may learn things that you were standing for that you didn't know you were standing for that are delightful, or things that you're like, oh man, I don't want anyone to think that about me. How do I change this? Try to get as specific as possible as you can when you're defining your audience. Everyone is not a real demographic. If you're trying to talk to everybody, you're going to end up talking to nobody. I'm sure you've heard that a million times. So consider who you're currently doing business with. Try to outline those people and really think about what type of people they are. consider who you want to be doing business with. Maybe you've got that one amazing client. Like, who are they? How would you find more of them in an audience? So consider who those people are. Also consider who you do not want to do business with. Branding is just as much about what you are as what you're not. So knowing who is not your client type is another wonderful way to start narrowing down your audience. So another thing to consider before you actually start the process of defining your brand is to remember that authenticity is key. Your brand attributes, when you get to the point of kind of figuring out what they are, they absolutely have to be true. People can see through faking it, so be honest with who you are. With that said, your brand attributes can be somewhat aspirational. Now, this shouldn't be, we want to be really fun, but right now we're really stodgy and corporate. That's fake. But if you're a kind of fun company and you wish you could take that further and you have ideas for taking it further, that's a good thing. Like, your brand attributes should be things that you have to live up to every day and constantly are finding new ways to interpret. Another thing to remember is when you're going to be authentic, you are going to both attract people, but you're also going to repel people. Get okay with people not liking you, because really strong brands, there's just as much adversity there as there is people who are really strong fans. Again, think about Apple. You've got people that will give up days to wait in line for the new phone, and then you have the other people that bend over backwards to not go anywhere near an Apple product. So if you really want to build a strong brand, you've got to get comfortable with that concept of people not maybe liking you all the time. Third one, watch out for defaults. When you are going through the brand process, you're going to be brainstorming, and your first ideas are most likely going to be defaults. When I say defaults, I mean they're things that pretty much every company should be. They're nothing that you can actually claim. When I'm working with my clients, I hear a lot of, we're trustworthy, we have integrity. And while those are wonderful, wonderful traits, pretty much every company should be trustworthy and should have integrity. I highly doubt any consumer gets up in the morning and is like, I'd really like to work with a really sketchy company today, So try to work past those. Those are great things to be, but they're not the things that you can capitalize on as a differentiator. Finally, before I start telling you about this process, it's important to remember that it is a process. You're building here, you're not creating. It's not a matter of in an hour or a couple weeks it's going to be finished. In an hour or a couple weeks you're going to have one piece done, and your brand is going to continue to evolve for the life of the company, honestly. Brand development is never, ever done. Over time, your brand will start to evolve more finely rather than big leaps and bounds. And over time, your brand is also going to start to stand more for what you're about than simply your product or service. And that's, when you stand for more than just a product, that's when you start to command that premium, because people are buying the overall experience of interacting with you rather than just the widget that you sell. So let me start talking to you about exactly how to go about building a brand in your organization. So the meaningful brand process is made up of 2 layers. The first one is the foundational layer, and the second one is the experience layer. So the foundation layer it's basically the core tenets of your organization. You can kind of think of it as the DNA of your organization. The experience layer then is made up of the ways you execute on those core tenets. So it's, again, the experience of interacting with your company. So the first layer, we'll start with the brand foundation. And the brand foundation includes 3 components: purpose, values, and style. So we will go ahead and start with purpose. So what exactly is purpose? Purpose is the reason that your organization exists. It's the reason you get up in the morning. It's probably the reason you started the business. Purpose is all about kind of finding that greater why. So why do you need a purpose? A purpose is going to help you build your company strategically. Again, not chasing every little, change in the market or change, new product or new way of marketing. It's going to help become like a guiding light for your organization. It's going to be something you can go back and kind of make decisions against and evaluate if we move forward in this way, is that aligned with our purpose or does it not? So how do you find your purpose? Well, there's a lot of different ways to find your purpose. No person's way is exactly the same. But you can start by thinking about things like, why did we start this business in the first place? You know, what pain were we trying to alleviate for our customers? You can also think about what activity in the business you love most. You know, is it the sales? Is it interacting with the customer? Is it really like building out a campaign or a product for them? You know, and then why is it that you love that? That's going to start giving you insight into the reason you keep doing this. Another way to think about it is, you know, when would you work for free? Like, when would that, you know, client or project come in that you're like, this is so amazing, this is everything I love about my business. I would just do this for free if I could, you know? Those things will start giving you some ideas into the purpose that drives your company. So some examples of purpose-driven companies. Obviously, we'll go back to Apple. So Apple's purpose is to challenge the status quo and delight their users. And now that you know that, you can probably see in everything they do, this runs through it. You know, when they launched the iPod, they didn't just launch a music device. They've launched a whole new way to think about and interact with and buy music. Same with, you know, their retail stores. They didn't just build another retail store like everyone has. They reinvented the experience of retail. So it all comes back to that, you know, destroying the status quo. You know, you open a box of like your new iPod or your new iPhone, and it's just fun to open the box. Like, it feels nice, it looks beautiful. I mean, I keep Apple boxes just because they're pretty, and it kind of pains me to get rid of them. I don't think I'm the only person that does that either, and it's because they've engineered this experience to be different from interacting with another mobile company. Google is another great example. Google's purpose is to organize the world's information and make it accessible for people. So if you think about how Google builds their business, everything tends to come back to this, right? Originally, there was a search engine. The whole point of that was to basically organize the web. Now you've got Gmail, it's organizing your email. You've got Docs, organizing your files. You've got Calendar, organizing your schedule, and a host of all these other products. You know, even, you know, think about Google Glass. It's trying to organize your experience of going through life, like all the things you might need to access in your everyday life. They're trying to put right there for you so that you can grab all that information and access it easily. Next, Coca-Cola. So this one might be kind of interesting to you. Their purpose is to refresh the world and inspire moments of optimism and happiness, which you're kind of like, that doesn't say anything about soda in it, right? That's because they're trying to deliver on this promise through their product itself. And if you think about how they market their company, they're completely fulfilling this. If you think about their commercials, you know, you think about Buy the World a Coke. It has nothing to do with, you know, we have a really wonderful tasting beverage. It's down to this, like, find a moment to connect with somebody, you know? Lots of times their advertisements or commercials kind of give you this idea of, like, you've earned this, like, to just take a moment, sit down, and enjoy a Coke. I know when I travel abroad, like, one of the fun things to do is buy a Coke, like, in the middle of Spain and sit in, like, a 1,000-year-old square. And it's just this moment of kind of nostalgia and happiness and optimism, and you just kind of relax. That all plays into the brand experience they've been creating for you for dozens and dozens of years. Starbucks is another wonderful example of this. I don't know how many of you know this, but their purpose is to create a third place between work and home. And you know, you think about, where do you go when your kids are running around the house and you've got to just finish that work thing before you can really be off for the weekend, right? You go to the coffee shop, you know? Or when you just want a little alone time and you want to just read a book, you go to the coffee house, right? Original American coffee house is Starbucks. So they're achieving that wonderfully. Last example is Southwest. Southwest is a little bit of a unique example here because their purpose is to connect people to what's important in their lives through friendly, reliable, low-cost air travel. The way they're a little bit different from a lot of people is that idea of cost. Most people's purpose will not play into cost because ultimately there can only be one player in any market that's based on trying to be the cheapest. So they're kind of my one weird example here. But if you think about it, they've engineered their entire business based on the bottom line. You know, they've reinvented processes of air travel simply to enable them to offer you a lower price. So defaults to avoid when you're working on defining your purpose. So like I was saying, your purpose should almost never be monetary unless you're going to be that one person in your industry that is everything points to the bottom line. Obviously, you have to make money in your company, and that's good. We all want you to make money, but that shouldn't be the driving purpose. Customers can see through that. They know when they're being treated like a number, and that's not going to add value for them. Your purpose should also not be a description of your product or service. I have a lot of people just say, you know, well, our purpose is to make this advertising product. It's like, what happens when people don't buy advertising anymore? Is your business just obsolete? Your purpose should speak to something slightly greater. Like, I actually have a client whose purpose is they develop advertising products, and their purpose is actually to provide more relevant advertising that delights consumers rather than annoys consumers. Now, that's something interesting that can translate across a whole host of products and services. So the next item of the brand foundation are your values. So your values are your deeply held organizational beliefs. They're your judgments or your principles or standards of what's right for your organization. So why do you need values? Again, values are going to help you make decisions, better, quicker, more on-par decisions for you. They can help you do things like determine client or staff fit. And when you are a value-led organization, customers can feel that. Customers want to work with organizations that believe the same things they do. And when they find that, they're generally extremely loyal and probably willing to pay that premium we talked about. So how do you find your organizational values? Well, again, there's lots of ways you can get there. You're probably going to sit down and write down integrity, but scratch that off and keep going. So consider what clients or projects you love working on. And then once you kind of got that figured out, try to reverse, figure out why that is that you love working with them so much. Likewise, think about the ones you hate, the ones that you loathe getting up in the morning when you know you have to work with this person or on this project. What about that experience is so miserable for you, That's gonna probably translate into something that you strongly value as an organization. And then kind of a little cheat here is that values should typically complete a statement, we value or we believe, X or Y. So some examples of values. So Zappos is an extremely value-led organization, which is funny because they basically sell shoes and clothes, right? Who would have thought they'd be such a value-driven organization? These are, I'm not going to read all these for you, but these are their organizational values that they post on their website. And so I'll just take a minute to describe the first one, deliver wow through service. So I don't know if you guys have heard this story or not about there was a customer who had called into the service line, and there must have been some sort of problem with their order because they were on the phone for a while, and they mentioned like missing dinner or something like that. And the service rep actually ordered them a pizza and had it delivered to their house. Like, that is delivering wow. That's a wow service moment. That's not just, oh, they gave me my money back, or they were nice to me on the phone. That's Zappos takes service to a whole different level. So another good example, there's an organization called 40 in Phoenix that I used to work for, and they're an experience design agency, and they're extremely values-driven. These are the values that are currently on their site. Some of these were probably present when I was there, and I think some are probably new. But the first one, again, I'll kind of explain their take on. Fight for the humans. So many design agencies are all about pleasing the client, which is good. We want to please the client. But more than pleasing the client, we want to please the customer because that's what's really going to please the client, right? So they were all about that, and that helped them find customers or that were aligned on that front, and that helped them as they were making decisions through a project about what they should do or what client they should take on. This value can help them translate into whether they should move forward with that decision or how they should move forward on that project. So last example in this section, my own company. I've been working on doing a little bit of a brand refresh for myself, and so I decided I should really sit down and really figure out my values. I kind of had a foggy idea of them. So this is what I came up with, and there's a funny story about that one you see called Assume the Best. So I told you to pay attention to your behavior. This one came directly out of a situation I had with a client. So probably a little over a month ago, I had a lead come to me, and they wanted their website redesigned. They were working with a designer. It wasn't working. This would have been a dream project for me. It was a perfect fit. I kind of love bailing clients out. It's like a weird thing of mine. So I was super excited about this project. I can totally rock this. I gave him an estimate. We agreed on a price. I had to take a week off, and I came back, and in that week off, he emailed me, and he was questioning everything in my contract. He was questioning my deposit. You could tell all of a sudden he was so untrusting, which I guess makes sense because he's been a little bit burned, but at this point, I've talked to him several times. I've delivered on every promise. There's no reason he should not trust me. I have always come through. So I email him back, and I'm like, I'm sensing that you don't trust me. This project is not going to work unless you trust me. You need to get to that point, and if that means we have to wait, that's fine, but I need you to get there. And he basically emails me back and flat out tells me to my face, I don't trust you. I don't think you should even have to trust me. We barely know each other. And while that premise makes perfect sense, this email kind of enraged me. I couldn't even sleep the whole night. I was so upset about it. And I kind of couldn't figure out why I was so upset about this client and what they were doing. And I realized it's because I have never, in all of my years of doing business, had someone tell me flat to my face they don't trust me. And I realized it's because I go into a project assuming they're going to do right by me, and because no clients ever told me they don't trust me, I assume they're coming in believing that I'm going to do right by them. And so this one situation kind of put a spotlight on the fact that I don't want to work with people who don't trust me. Flat out, if you need me to prove myself on the project, we're a bad fit because I'm never going to be able to do the best work for you when I'm just trying to prove to you. Just give me your trust, and then we'll move forward, and I'll probably produce something wonderful for you. But that's just a really good example of how paying attention to your behavior and why you're feeling things can help light up a value for your organization. So defaults to avoid when it comes to values. Kind of back to what I said in the beginning. Certain criteria are expected of a company: integrity, professionalism, trustworthiness. Those are defaults. You don't need to define those as values. You shouldn't be in business if you don't offer those things. So look for things that are things you can kind of claim uniquely, at least in your industry. Consider, would anyone want to be the opposite of this? If you can honestly think about a value and be like, oh, my competitor is totally the opposite, you've probably got a winner on your hands at that point because you can really uniquely capitalize on that. And just because you value one thing and your competitor values something opposite, it's not necessarily bad. You might be a furniture manufacturer and say you really value traditional craftsmanship. Well, you might have a competitor like IKEA that's all about quick, cheap, fast manufacturing, and that's fine. People love IKEA because they want a cheap table. But other people in their life might be ready to buy that super high quality piece that's going to be an heirloom. And having clearly specified that you're all about craftsmanship, even at the cost of, in effect, of too cheap of a price, that's going to be okay with them, and you can capitalize on that. So the third portion of the brand foundation is style. So what is style? Style is your unique personality, your character. It's kind of the specific way you do things, your manner of acting, or your manner of presenting yourself. Often people think of style, they only think of it visual, and it does heavily influence the visuals that support your brand, but it really can be leveraged through every aspect of the brand experience. Think about the way you talk to somebody. Think about the way you treat them. Do you treat them like a friend? Do you treat them like super professional, like colleague? how do you treat them? Like, all that starts to reflect your style. So why do you need style? Unique style is going to help you differentiate your organization. Just like a person, you know, you relate certain traits to a person, you want to build the type of brand that people relate certain traits to you. Customers, again, much like values, are drawn to a style that they value. You know, I'm obviously an Apple user because I appreciate well-designed objects. That matters to me because I'm a designer. Other people might not care. They only care if their computer's $500, and that's fine. But you can see how like-minded individuals are going to flock to people with similar style. Also, style can become iconic. Think about, you know, like Tiffany. You know, people call Tiffany, their blue color, Tiffany blue. Pretty sure that's not what they set out to do, but it's become so iconic to their company that people have basically claimed that shade as belonging to their company. So how do you find your style? So this one's a little bit trickier. Again, you just have to start paying attention to how you act on a daily basis. You know, how does your organization do things? Are you really casual? Are you really formal? Are you group-oriented? Or are you individual-focused? You know, how are you on a daily basis? You see I'm in jeans and t-shirt. That's because my business is extremely casual. You know, I'm never going to come up here in like a suit. That's so not the way we run things. So also, you know, pay attention to, are there trends in the aesthetic decisions you've made in your company, like in your office decor or in your retail store or your website, things like that. Pay attention to, are they similar, or does one feel like a better fit than another, and why is that? So some examples of style. Nike is a wonderful example of style. So you can tell that Nike has like this really wonderful, motivating, competitive, aggressive kind of style. And it shows in everything that they do, right? They use a lot of really bold colors, a lot of black and white, a lot of bright colors, really bold typefaces, interesting, you know, photography treatments. The way the copy's written is very in your face, you know? And that's just, it's a very consistent representation of that competitive, motivational, aggressive kind of style. Another example is T-Mobile. You might think this is kind of a weird example, but I've been like kind of watching T-Mobile lately, and they're doing something very interesting in the market. They've kind of got this whole rebel with a cause thing going on, that they're kind of trying to position themselves as they're on your side, whereas all the other mobile carriers are not on your side. They're kind of against you. And it shows in the way they present themselves. They're very edgy, bold, unexpected, irreverent. You know, who else would pick black and pink for a mobile carrier? You know, like, that's a very crazy choice, and that's okay, because they're trying to tell you, we're willing to be crazy to protect you, you know? Even think about some of their campaigns that they're running, this whole music freedom campaign, where you don't pay for data when you're streaming music. Or the idea that they're going to pay your early termination fee when you leave your other carrier. You know, they're really trying to produce this impression of, we're not like those guys, we're this wild, crazy, we're the rebels, you know? Come hang out with us. Last example, Target again. Bold, trendy, super high design. You know, I told you that when I started looking at this, I didn't realize how Target really values design. They're super bold in their execution. They use their unique shade of red, like, with reckless abandon. They're not afraid to, like, paint entire fields red. That's kind of scary for some people. Think about even, like, their advertising here. Not only is the photography style interesting, but the concept of the ad. They've done a mashup with Alexander McQueen. Like, that's very design focused. That's very on the edge. Even like this print ad, you know, they didn't just show you like a shopping cart full of stuff. Like, that's really boring. They like laid it out in this really fun, designy, fun to look at grid, because they value design and they're kind of bold like that. So defaults to avoid here. Beware of really generic, overused traits. So I get a lot of people asking me for simple, modern, professional, and those are wonderful things, but they're super broad and vague, and pretty much everyone wants to be those things. So everyone wants to be simple. In this day and age, no one wants anything more complex than it has to be. So it's kind of a given, unless you really want to be complex for some reason. Professional, again, who doesn't want to look professional? Modern's kind of an interesting one. I do think modern can be ownable, but I think if you're going to own modern, you got to figure out your brand of modern. You got to figure out, it's got to be clearer than just modern. And again, when you're thinking about this, consider, does anyone want to be the opposite of this thing? If you are choosing to be modern, is it because your competitor's traditional? Does someone else in your organization value traditional? Well, then you might be able to capitalize on modern. So the next layer of the meaningful brand is the experience layer. So the experience layer also consists of 3 components: verbal, visual, and an interaction layer. So the first one is visual. Visual basically references how your brand experience is translated visually. It can encompass things like your logo, your colors, typefaces, the way you use those typefaces, the typography treatments, illustration styles, iconography styles, photography, pattern, packaging, tons of visual cues. And they're all things to be considered when you're trying to build this unique, meaningful brand. Some examples here. Again, Nike. Nike's wonderful at this. So they use this insanely bold typeface, black and white, super kind of hardcore. It would not be the same if they used corporate navy and serif, right? It doesn't really translate anymore. It doesn't have that aggressive, motivating feel. Similarly, T-Mobile, if they switched to more of a blue and black, like everyone's used to seeing, it doesn't really maintain that rebellious look. They selected this visual appeal that resonates that rebellion that they're looking to take place in the mobile industry. And then again, Tiffany, they're known for that blue. And at this point, blue has become synonymous with like this timelessness, this quality. What if they just all of a sudden switched it up to pink? That kind of looks like it came from like a cheap jewelry store in the mall, right? It doesn't keep the same, feeling of the brand. So now let's talk about verbal. Verbal is how your brand experience is translated verbally throughout your marketing materials. This can encompass the way you talk, the way you write. It can be online, it can be offline. It'll encompass things like your voice or your point of view when you're speaking or writing, the tone with which you speak or write with, the structure of that content, the length of that content. Do you use really pithy statements or are you more verbose, Some examples of this, again, Nike. It wouldn't be the same if they changed their tagline to give it a try, right? That's not this verbal kick in the pants that you're used to from them. Apple, they've got an ad going right now that's all about how the iPhone empowers parents, right? And the way they talk is very, the tagline here says you're more powerful than you think. They're really trying to empower you that you're not just buying a phone, you're buying a better life, a way you can entertain your kids. They show using an app to take their temperature and find the lost dog and things like that. They're selling you a better way of living, and they're talking to you about you can live better when you work with us and use our phone. It wouldn't be the same if they ended that video or that commercial with, access thousands of apps. I don't know if you can see that. It's kind of light. But it's not the same, but yet other companies do advertise that way. Coke. So their tagline's open happiness, which of course fits perfectly with their purpose to have optimism and happiness. Wouldn't be the same if they changed their tagline to drink what's cool. That kind of sounds like a, blue and red competitor, which is actually very much what Pepsi is all about, is what's cool at this moment. So the last layer of the experience is interaction. Interaction is how your brand is translated through your actions. That can be with vendors, that can be with customers, really anybody. You should aim to have a very consistent, well-designed interaction with them. Ways this can manifest is through service design, through your retail experience or your office experience, product offering, process design, what products you offer, how those products are designed. So some examples here, again, back to Apple, the poster child of branding. So they have one handset, and sure, there's different iterations of that handset, but they focus on one super well-refined model of handset. Unlike Samsung, who, when I go to their website, I think they had like 30. There were multiple pages of handsets. I don't know the difference between these. I don't know their names. They all kind of look the same. I don't even understand why there are 30 of them. So Apple has chosen to just have the one really well-designed product because that's what matters to them. Again, their retail experience is really simple and delightful. You know, it's clean. You get to interact with anything. It's kind of like an adult toy store. You get to play with all the fun tech toys. Unlike, you know, Best Buy, everything's stuck behind one of those frustrating bubble packages. There's like 25 of everything on every row. How in the world are you supposed to pick between them? You know, which is fine for Best Buy. That's what they stand for. You know, they stand for selection and, you know, low price. Apple doesn't stand for that. They stand for high quality, simple, delightful, and it shows in their retail experience. Walmart. So Walmart's another interesting one that they are all about the bottom line. And that's good because everything comes back to that bottom line for them. So you notice in their store experience versus a Target store experience, you know, it's not near as like fun and pretty and clean. It's just kind of stuff thrown everywhere. You know, it's hard concrete floor because who has money to pay for carpet, right? I'm trying to give you the best deal. They have a million of everything. And that's good because that's what they want to do. That's why they're in business. They're all about giving you the cheapest price product. And when you know you need to buy something and you want it fast and you want it cheap, you go to Walmart, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Last example here is Starbucks. So I had mentioned how Starbucks' purpose is to be that third place. And a few months ago, I think it was at the very beginning of the year, they had announced like they were going to try offering beer and wine in the evenings, and it got kind of mixed reviews. But when you think about it, it's perfectly on par with that mission, right, of being the third place. Who wants, you know, caffeine at 7 o'clock at night? You know, you probably got to go to sleep pretty soon. But you probably would go, you know, meet a friend for a glass of wine. So it's perfectly in line with their purpose. Whether or not it's going to work, who knows? But it is in line with their purpose. So that is pretty much the entire Meaningful brand, made up of the 6 steps. So before I let you go, I wanted to share just a few lessons I've learned through working through this myself, working through this with clients. Give yourself time to flesh these things out. You know, again, I made it seem like it's just 6 easy steps, but it's not 6 easy steps. It's a lifetime of 6 easy steps. You know, your brand is going to continue to evolve. And the longer that you're working on building the brand, the more it's going to be refinements versus, you know, vast shifts of the brand. If you're just starting out, you're going to experience some like abrupt shifts. You're probably going to start going one way, and you're going to do it for 6 months, and all of a sudden you're going to be like, man, I was like half wrong on all this stuff. And that's okay. You just keep shifting until you kind of fall into the right place. It's going to take time. When you are working on building the brand, get insights from your customers and your staff. You know, like I said earlier, your customers have a lot of good insight about, you know, what they value, and it might be things you didn't even understand you were doing, like these wonderful things that they appreciate and find tons of value in that you didn't even know you were doing. There also might be a bunch of things in there that you don't want anyone to know you for, and so you've got to find a way to get those out of your organization. If you are going to get insights from customers and staff, just keep in mind that there does need to be, the leader of the company needs to set the vision. You know, a successful brand isn't going to take place like from the bottom, you know. You can find attributes there. That's why we're suggesting, you know, interviewing your staff. But ultimately, there has to be someone to set the vision and kind of make the executive decision on what the company is going to be about and then how we're going to translate that. So if you want any more information about this, there's a few really good books here. So the first is Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And this book is all about finding your purpose. That's kind of his mission. He talks all the time at conferences about finding your purpose. There's also a TED Talk if you hate reading. although you're going to get a lot more about it out of the book. Another book is called Positioning for Professionals by Tim Williams. This book looks like the most boring book in the whole world when you look at the cover, but please don't let it fool you, because if I could keep one business book out of all the books I've ever read, it would be this book. It's amazing. It's going to talk about, the subhead's going to say something about, something for knowledge firms, but just ignore that, because really the insight in it is good for everyone. And then finally, The Brand Gap by Marty Neumeyer. He's kind of the godfather of branding. I think he was one of the first people who started, writing a book about it and kind of brought it to the forefront. It's a little bit older book. It's really short. You can probably read it on a flight. That's kind of like his goal, to make it short enough to read on a flight. But if you do read that, take a couple of things with a couple grains of salt, because he talks about needing to have a logo that animates and stuff like that, which you don't need that. He also talks about having to have a mascot. You don't need that either. So that was like 10 years ago. So take it out with a grain of salt, but he does have a lot of good information about that concept of a brand, about that it's what other people think you are, not necessarily what you want them. You can want them to think one thing, but if you're not setting the experience up that they'll think that, then you're in trouble. So, and then I also have a kind of a workshop boot camp thing that's in development called Brand Camp. There's little cards on your table. If you're possibly interested in anything with this, it's totally still in development. You've basically witnessed the outline for the course. If you want updates about when it launches, you can just sign up there. You won't actually be signing up to take the course, just to get an email when it launches.